Okay, there we go. All right. Hello, my name is Liz Levosinski. I'm very excited to be here. My father was from Poland, and this is my first visit here. His family came from a small town about 2 hours from Warsaw. I'm an iOS developer from the US, and I work at a company called Detroit Labs, which makes mobile and web applications and other various software solutions. You can contact me on LinkedIn or email me at levosins@gmail.com. Today I wanted to talk about adding a Sirikit extension to an existing app. The Sirikit extension we'll be reviewing today allows the user to use Siri voice commands to pay bills. For this example, this is only possible if the user is logged in on the app and if the user has already set up an automatic payment method within the containing application. Keeping this in mind, I'm going to go over the overall functionality of Sirikit as well as the pitfalls I encountered during my first attempt at building this extension. I'm not a Sirikit expert, but wanted to share what I gleaned from my first experience working with it. And I created this extension because our company wanted to add an intuitive feature for an app we have for an energy company. They thought it might be nice to have a quick alternative way to pay off an electric bill instead of manually logging in and going through all the steps. They could just talk to their phone instead, do a quick, just pay off the bill. Lastly, if you want to look at the code examples when I explain them later in this talk, you can just go to that GitHub link up there and download the project if you want. It's not essential though. You could look at it after the talk too, if you downloaded it. I'll also show this GitHub link at the end, just in case, and I'll answer all questions at the end. So here are the contents of my talk. First, I was going to show a video example of the Sirikit extension, explain Sirikit and the frameworks that make it up. I'm going to explain what intents are, especially the in-pay bill intent, which we'll be working with today, how to add Sirikit and app groups to your app. I'm going to show my example app code, go through that in depth. I'm going to explain adding custom Sirikit vocabulary, testing Sirikit, a little bit about security, Sirikit on the HomePod, and then the resources, which I used for this. So first I'm going to step through this video example of the extension. So first the user launches the app. Is this playing? Sorry. Oh, come on. All right, so after they launch the app, they first have to give the app approval to use the Siri voice commands. So after they approve it, they have to sign in. So they'll have access to the user's data, their account information. Because if you're not signed in, then the extension can't access their information. They then say, "Hey Siri," which will then look at through the iOS device to find a relevant Siri app. Once it finds that, you have to say, "Hey Siri, pay my bill," which will then make an API call to get the user's data. And if the user has more than one address that they're paying the bills for, then they're prompted to pick the correct address to pay. So once they choose which location they're paying for, they can then either say or press send to send the payment. So that's what the extension will be doing. Okay, so what is Sirikit? Sirikit encompasses the intents and intents UI frameworks, which are used to implement app extensions that integrate your services with Siri and Maps. Sirikit supports two types of app extensions. There's an intents app extension and an intents UI app extension. And to implement Sirikit, your iOS version needs to be at least iOS 10. And something to keep in mind, just make sure your embedded framework does not contain APIs unavailable to app extensions. So the first time I had tried to implement Sirikit, it was on a legacy app and it was old and it was written in Objective-C, which doesn't necessarily matter, but there were old libraries associated with this application. And so the extension wasn't able to use those libraries, they weren't compatible, so we ended up having to rewrite like some of those API calls just for the extension itself because it wasn't compatible with those older libraries. That's something just to keep in mind, something I ran into. So what is an intents app extension? An intents app extension receives user requests from Sirikit and turns them into app-specific actions. So like the video I showed earlier, your user might ask Siri to send a message, book a ride, or pay a bill using your app. So it's like the intents app extension, it's the core functionality of Sirikit. It takes users' requests and turns it into an actionable thing. So what is an Intense UI app extension? An Intense UI app extension is optional and is used to style and customize the content that's displayed in Siri or the Maps interface after the Intense app extension fulfills a user's request. So up on the screen up there is a screenshot of an unstyled Sirikit extension interface. I chose not to add custom styling or change the interface for my Sirikit extension, but I'll show you a quick example of what you could do if you did want to style that content. So up there is an Intense UI app extension storyboard. This is an image of an application in Xcode that has both an Intense UI app extension and an Intense app extension. The Intense UI app extension comes with a view controller and a storyboard that you can customize. So you could pick colors, animations, or styles. So I just put just a UI view, like a green UI view, just to show what you could do. But you could put, in real life, you would want to put labels and things to output relevant data. But so this is what it would look like when the app's in action. This is an example of a Sirikit messaging app. It's set up just like my project. It's just using the in-send message intent instead of the in-pay bill intent. Most of the intents are very similar in how they work, though. You can also show and hide various parts of the UI. Like there are guidelines in Apple's developer documentation that say things along the lines of, make sure when you're styling this that there's enough padding for the app content, that the content doesn't scroll. Avoid making the interface have extra elements that appear interactive, because the only thing that the Siri interface can respond to is just a tap. So you can't do things like drag things around or do a bunch of crazy stuff. But and then lastly, you don't have to include the app name or icon in your custom interface, as the system automatically shows this information. Let's see. So what are intents? I kept talking about intents. So Sirikit defines intents as types of requests that users can make. And intents that are related are grouped into domains. So the app I'm explaining today uses the in-pay bill intent from the payments domain. In the payments domain, you can send payments between users or pay bills. So other domains include VoIP messaging, lists and notes, visual codes, photos, workouts, ride booking, car commands, CarPlay, and restaurant reservations. So now I'm going to explain, go into more in depth for the intent I'm using for this application. So in this application, we're focusing on the in-pay bill intent. So all of these properties must be filled out for the payment to succeed. You need the transaction amount, the transaction schedule date, when the bill's due, the bill's totaled, the minimum amount that's due, the payment date, and if there's a late fee or not. You also need the from account information. So this is how the user's paying for it. It's the user's credit card or bank account number. And then lastly, there's the bill payee. So it's the company the user has an account with that they're paying off. So for instance, if the user had a water bill, the bill payee is the user's account with like the water company. So it's an object that has the account number, organization name, and account nickname. This comes up again in a little bit. So let me tell you really quickly how to add Sirikit to your app. So first you add an Intense extension by selecting your project target and then pressing the bottom left plus sign. Select the Intense extension, enter a name for it. You press activate to activate that scheme. Then you go into the info plist in the newly generated extension folder. And under the NS extension dictionary, inside the intent supported array, you want to delete the default intents and just add the ones you want to use. So in our case, it's just the in-pay bill intent that we want to be using. So then going into the containing applications app delegate, you want to be sure to add the import intents at the top so you can add the request authorization code, which is this. You need to add this so the user can grant the app permission to use Siri commands in the containing app in the app delegates did finish launching with options function, excuse me. So this is like in the video when there was that prompt that showed up that the user had to tap OK on. You have to give the application, you have to give it authorization to use these Siri commands. Then you also need to add a Siri usage description into the app's info plist, and lastly add the Siri entitlement by flipping the Siri's capability switch. So these are all the steps to set up Sirikit with your app, and you can check them out in more detail in the resources slide that I've attached near the end if you wish. And see, so after adding an intent to the app, you also need to add an app group so you can tell whether or not if the user is logged in. I use an app group because the app and the extension are separate and they can't directly share data with each other. This is something I learned about extensions in general that I didn't know. So it's like to be able to just share between the containing app and the extension, just the Boolean of yes, I'm signed in, or yes, the user's not signed in. So to enable data sharing, use Xcode or the developer portal to enable app groups for the containing app and its contained app extensions. Next, register the app group in the portal and specify the app group to use in the containing app. Go to your developer account, go to certificates, identifiers, and profiles. Select target capabilities, and under app groups, switch that to on. And then tap on the plus sign under app groups to add your app group. And then just select the extension you want to share this app group, turn app groups to on, and then check off the checkbox for the group you just created. Once you do these steps, the app group is automatically added to your developer account under identifiers. It also enables the app groups on the app ID. So after enabling app groups, the Sirikit extension and its containing app can both use the NSUser defaults API to share access to user defaults and to share information between each other. So inside the containing application, so this is all in the example project, when the user presses the sign in button, like in the example, the app will check to see if the app group exists. If it does, it initializes a user defaults object. And using that app group with the suite name that was given earlier. The suite name is the name you gave your app group in the developer portal. In our case, I just called it group.warsaw.sirikit. It could be any string as long as it was formatted properly. And then with these user defaults, you can share any object type. You could share a string, an int, a Boolean, whatever you needed between the app and its extension. In our case, a Boolean was appropriate because all we needed to know is if the user was signed in or not, so yes or no. Let's see, so this function, this update shared data, it updates the user defaults Boolean. Oh, what happened? Let's import this. Huh. Oh, cool. All right, I'll just reiterate some of what I had said. We can keep going. Okay, so back inside the containing application. So when a user presses the sign in button, the app checks to see if the app group exists. If it does, it initializes a user defaults object, and then using that app group with the suite name that was given earlier. So it was the string that was defined earlier in the developer portal. So in our case, it was group.warsaw.sirikit. So with user defaults, you can share any object type. So anyone you need, string, int, boolean, array, whatever is appropriate for you. In our case, boolean works just fine. So we just need to know, are they signed in, yes or no? Let's see. So this function updates the user defaults boolean and synchronizes the defaults so that they're updated in both the extension and the containing application. So it's setting it, then synchronizing. This update shared data is called here. So this is called whenever the sign in or sign out button IB actions are triggered by the user pressing the buttons, obviously, in the view controller. All right, so after creating an app group and adding the extension to our app, a new folder was generated in the project. The folder contains two files. There's the intent handler.swift and the info.plist. The intent handler.swift contains some default code for a different intent we're not going to use, so that's what's generated at first. But I replaced that template code with code that sets up the in-pay bill intent. So I created a class called payBillRequestHandler, which holds all the logic for my Sirikit extension. It has the in-pay bill intent handling protocol, which gives it access to all the Sirikit functionality. So in this function, it's just looping through all the available intents, and once there's one that matches the in-pay bill intent, it just returns the custom class that I created that has all the logic for this extension. So in my payBillRequestHandler class, my code goes through 3 Sirikit phases. There's the resolution phase, the confirmation phase, and then handling the intent. So during the resolution phase, the parameters of the intent object are validated to make sure you have the information you need to continue. And then during the confirmation phase, it confirms the details on an intent. So it's just performing the final validation of the intent parameters and make sure that your services are ready. And then lastly, it handles the intent. So this step, it ensures that the intent is fulfilled and provides feedback to Sirikit about what you did. So this is where you do something with all the data you collected for your specific intent. In our case, it's just posting a payment for the app. So explaining the resolution phase. These are all the possible resolution functions, like all the names of them, that could be used to prompt the user to populate the in-pay bill intent response. So none of these are required, and in fact, the less of these you use, the better your user experience. Because the more information you can just programmatically populate, the less you'll need Siri to ask the user for more information. So each one of these would prompt the user for information, like when do you want to pay this bill? How much are you paying? Each time it asks them a question. So the less of that you have to do, I think the better experience. So if any of the information is missing from this object, Sirikit will not move on to the next phase. It'll just fail. So this was a pitfall I ran into when I was just testing, even with dummy data. So even something like that transaction note, something I didn't think would really matter, if you don't provide it some kind of dummy data or string while you're just testing it or get it to go through this, all the steps, it'll just fail. And that was pretty confusing to me. So ideally, you should be able to populate all these properties programmatically. You should be able to use the same post or requests that your containing application uses. So for instance, if in your containing app, there's an automatic payment method already set up, like if it's an energy company and they already have an automatic payment to set up to keep paying their bills, you should be able to use that API call to fill out most of this information already. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's good to reuse it. All right, so this is a custom function I wrote, the finish bill details. This function populates the in-bill details object with the user's account information, such as the summary of the charges, the charge date ranges, late fees, the total due. It sets the bill type, the minimum due, bill's due date, etc. For this project, we just had the amount the user was going to pay be the bill's total, and then set the payment date to the current date. So then it would just be an automatic, you just say the one command, and it would automatically pay the whole bill, and it would just be at that moment, that current date. But if you wanted to, you could customize it further. You could prompt the user, if you wanted the user to have the freedom to pay different amounts, if they want to be able to be prompted so that if they wanted to pay maybe $40 of the total, like how, or if they wanted to pay it maybe a couple days from now, you could customize it so it could do that. But in our case, we just went with something that would be less steps for the user. All right, so this is the one resolution function I did have to use for this. I needed to use it because it was possible that our users could have multiple addresses, like they could be paying maybe for a condo and an apartment, and I needed to know which address they were paying the bill for. So I'm going to break this up just into two parts. So the first part of this function, it checks to see if the user is logged in so we can access their account information. So that's where all the app group and the user default stuff comes in. So whether or not the user is logged in, though, you must pass Sirikit a payee. There's no failure function for this, which is strange. So if they're not logged in, you have to pass an empty payee, which will force it to fail in the confirmation phase. So this function gets called a few times. This is part of the cycle of Sirikit. The first time, the class property bill pays array is empty, like the first time through. So I had to make an API request to get the user's information. And once I have the user's data for their account info, I then call my custom function create bill payee to see if they have more than one account. If they do, I loop through the account information in the data and append each one to the bill payees array. So if they have more than one account, I call the in-bill pay resolution disambiguation function. It's a crazy long name. And I pass the array of in-bill payees I generated. However, if there's only one payment account, the bill pay is resolved, and then the user will never see the next slide with all the addresses. This is just a visual of when the in-bill pay resolution result disambiguation function is called. So the user will have to choose an address when it's called. So then moving on to the confirmation phase, confirming an intent. This just ensures that the in-pay bill intent response that we're sending to Sirikit has all the properties filled in. I also just wanted to point out in the in-pay bill intent response, there's a user activity property. And right now we're setting it to nil because it's not needed in this example. But if you wanted to, it could be used to pass information from to your app delegate, the containing application from your extension. So if you wanted to send information from the extension into your app, you can use this user activity to do so. But we didn't need that. So this is what happens when all the confirmation phase is successful. This is what you see, all the bill details. And then lastly is handling the intent. So this is just the part where you can send the payment. So whatever your posting logic is, you just put in here. That's what the submit payment part is. And that's when the user says send, says or press send. And that's what you see. So send some extra things to think about. So if you wanted to, you could define app-specific terms for your users to make requests through Siri. You can declare terms that are either contact names, contact groups, photo tags, car nicknames, things like that. It's suggested that when you register vocab, don't pick things that are already easily understood, like my workout or my photo album. You want like, custom names or vocab, things that are, just very specific to your app. Something completely unique. So if you wanted to, you could have catchphrases or things that would just trigger your application. And testing. Since Xcode 9, you can edit the Sirikit extension scheme to have a default Siri intent query. So you don't have to look really weird by saying the same thing over and over again. When I didn't know about this, I'd be sitting there sometimes just saying, pay my bill, and that's kind of weird. But you could just go instead into product scheme and then make sure the extension's selected. Select the info tab, and inside of the Siri intent query, you can just paste in whatever command you were going to be saying over and over again. You can just put it there, so each time it's run, it'll do that for you. Let's see, then security. Depending on what intent you use, you may be able to access Siri from the lock screen. If you have an intent that can be accessed from there, you should consider adding an extra security step. One way you can do this is by populating the intents restricted while locked array with any intent supported values that you have. So this was what would have been filled out when your app was initially set up. So if you go to your extensions info.plist, and then under the NS extension dictionary and the NS extension attributes, you can populate the intents restricted while locked array with your current intent. So if you do that, when the user invokes the intent, the OS will prompt the user to unlock the device first. So that's the screen you're seeing there. And then lastly, there is Sirikit on HomePod. Currently, you can speak to HomePod, giving it Sirikit requests like, under list and notes or messaging domains, and Siri recognizes Sirikit requests made on the HomePod and sends those requests to relevant apps on iOS devices you have connected and communicating with the HomePod. So if you have applications that either would work with lists and notes or messaging, you could possibly have it speak to a HomePod as well. It's just another use case for it. Here are a lot of the resources I've used. I found the most helpful were the Apple documentation and the Ray Wenderlich tutorial in this list. That's it. If you wanted to download the project and the slides, they're at that GitHub link right here. It has everything we talked about and the sample project if you're interested. Okay, any questions?